Welcome back to Business I Am. My name is Simba Elijah Charles Kiage. Now, the Kenya National Bureau of Statistics data shows that the number of persons aged between 15 and 34 who are not learning or working has increased from 2.75 million in December to 2 million in June last year. Now, since the pandemic struck, nearly 3.17 million young Kenyans eligible for work or school are idle in 3 months to June, underlining the time bomb of youth unemployment in an economy shedding jobs, seeing firms downsize and send employees in voluntary leave. Thus, the unemployment rate in the second quarter of 2020 has doubled from 4.7% recorded in the second quarter of 2019. Therefore, the youth continue to suffer from unemployment and underemployment. Now, the survey also did analyze the labor market situation for the population aged 15 to 64 years from the period from April to June 2020. The highest proportion of the unemployed was recorded in the age groups 20 to 24 and 25 to 29, registering 22.8% and 21.7% unemployment rate respectively. Furthermore, the two age cohorts had the highest increase each in unemployment for over the 3 months at 10.1% and 14.3% respectively. In addition, the quarter saw a rise in unemployed persons to 4.6 million from 2.9 million in a quarter one. Now, this saw the combined rate of unemployment and potential labor force rise to 22.6% from 14.3% in the first quarter of the year. Now, for joining us this morning to help us put into perspective the unemployment hurdle in Kenya, it is Jacqueline Mogom, the CEO Federation of Kenya Employers. Jacqueline, good morning. Happy to have you around.
Good morning to you, and thank you for inviting me to come into your program.
Fantastic. Let's therefore get into it. Now, Kenya was already experiencing an economic downturn in 2019 that meant the economy witnessed job losses, and with most companies in Kenya taking unprecedented measures that saw some employees go through job cuts. Therefore, paint for me a picture. Is the recent data a culmination of a trend that started in 2019?
Yes, it is. As early as last year, quarter one, I can say that enterprises were already in distress. We couldn't really understand why, and we were seeing an increasing trend in redundancies and job losses and closure of enterprises. So we were then engaging government to see what could be done to cushion and to contain this situation. So, of course, COVID-19 pandemic has made an already complex situation even more complex and increased the rate of job losses. The figures you've given are quite alarming, but they are true. They are a true reflection of the picture that we are seeing. And it therefore means that we have an even higher number of unemployed people, particularly amongst the youth. And this is what we've been talking about really in the last 6 months or so, about what can we do to contain the loss of jobs and also to help enterprises be able to tide over through this difficult phase and be able to accept as many people back into jobs as possible.
Fantastic. Now, for Jacqueline, I just want to point out to a report that you also released during just in a couple of weeks ago, where you said that 600 firms had already sent employees home because of redundancy claims. My question for you this morning is, wow, could have the government thought of something to help these firms hold on to their employees so that we get out of the COVID-19 pandemic? Because that's fear that some of them may never get back to business again.
It is true some of those firms may never recover. As soon as we realized that the pandemic was going to cause untold suffering to our people and also make it impossible for enterprises to keep people in jobs because of the payroll pressure, we did engage government, and government was willing to engage. We had a whole host of options, proposals, ideas on what could happen. One of those was really some wage relief fund, removing or sharing the payroll pressure with enterprises, especially the small and medium ones, to be able to help them bear the payroll burden, if I may call it that way. So what the government did was to give incentives and to give some protection in matters of taxation, looking at the pay levels. We know what the government did, VAT and all that, which was good. But the enterprises were still left with having to grapple about people's pay, what to do with the contracts of employment. What do you tell your staff when they have to go home? Not many of them could work from home. That was a new idea. There are some jobs which simply cannot be done from home. You have some IT-related work, maybe some marketing, those in research who do reports, those can work from home. But the majority of our people don't know what this work from home idea is. Neither were enterprises prepared to do that. So many of them had to invest in equipment, in facilities to support people to work from home. So that also required investments. You had to buy computers, you had to ensure that you're well connected, the internet is working, wherever your people live. So that in itself was an additional cost. So what we're seeing now is enterprises that have done the best they can, using a whole raft of options that we gave them as employers and as unions and as government, because we engaged and we proposed as FKE to the social partners, that is the trade union and our Ministry of Labor, that look, we need to come up with an agreement, a framework agreement that reduces the exposure of both jobs and enterprises in this season. And after a lot of toing and froing, we were able to come up with a memorandum of understanding, which has a whole host of options, sending people on leave if they have leave, on unpaid leave, looking at salary cuts, looking at changing your shift arrangements, job sharing, part-time work. But now it's 6 months down the road, and all those measures have been exhausted. So what you're seeing now in terms of actual job losses on the 600 firms is a reflection of the kind of stress that our businesses are in, and also which unfortunately also means job losses for people. The 600 firms are just the firms that we know, the ones we've reported, the ones we have tracked. So you're seeing huge numbers from the Central Bureau of Statistics and from other quarters, which actually show that more jobs than the jobs we're talking about from these 600 firms have been lost.
All right, now, from where you're sitting this morning, Jacqueline, I just want to point you back to that data again. I mean, if KNBS and the Labor Department is telling us that, well, if you look at the form of jobs that have been lost during this COVID-19 pandemic, it is 1.7 million. What are we saying? Are we saying that all the jobs that have been created by the Jubilee government have just been wiped out by the COVID-19 pandemic?
Well, for now, that seems to be the scenario. And remember that Kenya is largely an informal job situation country. Most of our jobs are in the informal economy. We have about 18 million jobs. 15 million of those are in the informal sector. Only 3 million are in the formal sector. So if 1.7 million jobs have been lost, and I think it is true, then you're talking about half the jobs which are in the formal sector having gone. And of course, the same situation is true of the informal economy, where most of the jobs were, and which is even harder hit because they're less prepared to cushion themselves from all these shocks that the pandemic has brought and what was happening before. So cumulatively, we could have lost up to 50% of the 18 million jobs that we had in both formal and the informal ones. Of course, it's a result of a pandemic, something totally unforeseen. We had not prepared for it. Then we have our own other complications as a country, the issues we're dealing with right now, which puts a lot of instability and unpredictability in the economy. We don't know as business people how to plan because we are not yet seeing light at the end of the tunnel. We do not even know if the curve is flattening. Other numbers we're seeing a true reflection of what the situation is on the ground. So that kind of uncertainty makes it very difficult for businesses to plan and even to put in place business continuity arrangements and plans to be able to cushion themselves and start getting back onto the road of recovery.
Pretty much. Jacqueline, I just want to point you back to your report again this morning, the 600 farms that you are quite aware that have sent their staff back home on redundancy claims. Let's go back to that. I mean, when you look at it, which sectors among those 600 farms have been seen to be the ones that are shedding more jobs? Because now there's this talk also in the economy that, well, if your sector is not in the defensive sector, then Yes, you were exposed to COVID-19, but if you're non-defensive, then you were pretty much not that much exposed.
The question about which sectors have shed most jobs can only be answered if you consider which sectors have most jobs in this country. Where are the jobs in the country? We've talked about the informality and the high level of jobs there, 15 million jobs as compared to 3 million. If you look at the numbers, the main driver of this economy is still agriculture. 34% of our GDP comes from agriculture. Most of the jobs are either in agriculture or manufacturing, or the hospitality sector, which you know was decimated, the service sector, the hotels, the restaurants. These sectors were rendered dysfunctional. They completely were closed. So most jobs were there. And actually, if you look at the hospitality sector alone, in the initial phase when we closed down or sent people from home, about 3 million jobs were at risk. These were jobs at risk. They were not necessarily lost, but there were people at home wondering when we would reopen. So most of the jobs we've lost are in the agriculture sector, in the manufacturing sector, in the service sector, and largely also in the informal economy. For us as employers, as we look at the 600 or so firms, it's actually fairly spread. If you look at the education sector as well, where there hasn't been much happening, because everybody is at home, from universities to nursery school students, the jobs have been lost there. Some may come back, of course, when we reopen, but the bulk of the jobs there have not been, we can't say for sure that they'll all be able to resume work. So the job losses are quite a strong reflection of the structure of jobs as it is anyway in this country. Quite well spread, but heavily leaning towards the sectors which have been hardest hit by the pandemic. And you're looking at hospitality, you look at tourism, you look at education. Manufacturing is a checkered picture because some of them actually gained from this situation because there was a high demand for PPEs and that kind of thing.
Yes, now let's talk about what the government tried to do to cushion the economy or salvage the economy from these headlines that we're talking about this morning, the economic stimulus package. Jacqueline, from where you sitting this morning, would you say that it did help alleviate some of the job losses that we could be talking about this morning?
Not on the whole, no. I think most of the measures that the government took had some immediate impact on stabilizing panic because enterprises were wondering, so what do we do with our loans? How do we service these loans? And you had the opportunity to go and renegotiate. If you're an SME somewhere and you had a loan, then the bank was telling you, we are open to renegotiation. But of course, it just meant that you have a longer period within which to pay. They were not waiving the loan or reducing anything, which they can't because they're in business. So that gave people some reprieve. But if you look at VAT, for instance, yes, that had a direct impact, of course, on alleviating spend. And if you look at the bottom, the lowest income earners who now were not required to pay tax, then that would have given them some cushioning. But for you to feel it, you have to have the job. So most of these people are the ones who are home anyway. So it wasn't a benefit you felt directly because you are not earning that income anyway. So that tax rebate wasn't a reality for you. So what the government has done was commendable, but it's far from enough. A lot more needs to happen. We do still need prudent fiscal and measures that would give us monetary policies that we can count on. We need stability in the labor market. We need to know that we are not overborrowed and that kind of thing. So this kind of uncertainty still makes it very difficult for business, as I was saying earlier, to plan. And if you look at even monies that are meant to address the emergency situation that we have now, the pandemic, we are not sure whether it's been well spent. Every day you're seeing one committee, one organization, one company, public sector one largely, after the other appearing before Parliament. Then it makes you really wonder as a business people whether you can invest in that kind of situation.
3.7 million youth are idle. And then there's this statistic that also shows us that the COVID-19 pandemic has gone with 1.7 million jobs. But then at the back of that, we also do know that we are churning out graduates who are supposed to join the labor market in the country each year with no promise that they're going to hang somewhere. Now, from what you're saying this morning, if 70% of our population is youthful, do you think that we have a short-term fix to this unemployment situation that we're talking about in the country? Because honestly, from where it stands, it's as if we've lost the unemployment battle.
We don't have quick fixes for the unemployment situation, but I don't think all is lost. We have a huge task to address. A lot is actually happening, but not fast enough. There has been realization for quite some time now that we got it wrong when we pushed most of our young people to get higher and higher qualifications, to get degrees, to get masters, to get PhDs, forgot the TVET element, the technical and vocation element, the practical skills that our youth could still acquire and be able to contribute to the economy and actually get jobs, because in that mid-level cadre of skills, there is still a demand. We require technicians, we require ICT people, we're moving into a digitalized space, we need to commercialize agriculture and make it more interesting, more exciting for youth to work in. So we need to change and look at what I call job-rich sectors and be able to drive our youth towards that. There's a lot of investment that's happening in TVET to make it attractive to youth. The government is now offering to finance and to give loans to TVET students. But of course, if you go into a TVET institution now, you're coming out in the year 2020, 2021, but we already have a huge number, as you're rightly pointing out. What do we do with the ones who are there now, who need jobs? Those are the ones for whom we need to think about coming up with a clear system of internships and partnerships with the private sector to find places for them so that they could acquire skills that are needed in the economy. We need statistics to understand where are the skill gaps, where do we need skills, and we need to do robust research. It's happening in bits and pieces. We need labor market information to inform policy so that we can develop skills amongst these youth who are ready and willing to work that would make them, put them in high demand in the country. So this national skills development policy is very important. We need to have a system of recognizing prior learning. There are a lot of people in this economy who have skills which are not recognized. You don't have a paper, but then when you go to look for employment, you ask for some paper or other. So how do we document these skills that people have acquired and be able to give it some form of certification to make you competitive in the labor market? And that is happening. We have the Qualifications Authority, which was launched recently, which will be looking at that. We have projects, for instance, under the National Industry Training Authority, which is looking at master craftsmen and looking at certification. But all this needs to happen quickly because it's taking long. And then I've talked about skills development partnerships between these TVET institutions and industry so that we can have apprenticeships, we can have internships, and on-the-job learning to be able to help our youth be ready for this new world of employment. So I think you look at a raft of interventions, then you look at the sectors which are likely to have the jobs, and I've pointed them out, and then drive our youth towards those sectors to be able to have them absorbed and to remove this fixation with degrees and masters and PhDs, which are very important. I'm not downplaying them, but it is quite as important to have the mid-level skills and be able to recognize them to the highest level, because in other developed economies, you could start off as a plumber level 1, but you gradually grow into a degree level or even higher qualification, which means you compete fairly effectively with those who have more of the academic qualifications.
Yes, Jacqueline, as we clear this conversation in just 1 minute, and I don't know whether I should ask you this, but because of the situation on the ground, I get to ask you this. Talk to me from an inside-out perspective. Can you put a timeline on when we could be talking about a changed trend in the unemployment numbers within the country?
No, that would be asking me to be a crystal ball gazer, which I'm not. But I think the important thing is speed, recognizing we have a problem, and everybody does, and all of us working together as stakeholders in the education sector, in industry, employers, and the institutions of learning, and the youth themselves, to come up with strategies that work. So putting together everything that's happening in the country, making it more cohesive. There are bits and pieces of projects and interventions happening everywhere. So bringing this together so we have a holistic national plan to be able to address that. So for me, I would say in the next year or so, we really do need to address this. Right now, we know that's the biggest problem. But to get jobs, you need enterprises. So that's what FKE says. We also need to look at the sustainability of enterprises and help them recover from the bashing that they've taken from COVID-19 so that our youth would find a place to go to. They can't work nowhere. Whether it's self-employment or it's formal employment, you need to strengthen the fabric and the infrastructure to help the enterprises be able to create more and more jobs, because jobs are created by enterprises. Government just formulates the policy. So we as employers, we are very willing to work in this because it is in our interest to have the skills that are needed to drive us to the next level.
15 seconds, Jacqueline. How optimistic are you that finally, in some sort of way, we're going to find a solution to the employment hurdle in the country?
I'm very optimistic about that. We know for sure that we need jobs for our youth. And you see, we're not only looking at the Kenyan market, we're looking at the global market. And as we speak, the National Employment Authority, for instance, under the Ministry of Labor, is looking at foreign employment for our people, but coming up with bilateral labor agreements that ensures that if a Kenyan goes to work in Jordan or Kuwait or some other country, the conditions under which they work are conditions which are acceptable to us as a country and are in line with global and international standards. So Africa is a supplier of labor for the future, or of the future. Kenya is one of those countries in Africa. We actually have a very good reputation as a country. Our people are well skilled. We are hard workers. We have the right attitude. So our people, our young people, are in demand. And I am therefore very optimistic, because if you look at the developed economies like Europe, they have an aging population. Our skills will be in demand. We are the ones who will help drive those economies. So if we prepare our youth for this global setting, there is absolutely no reason why we should not be able to overcome the unemployment challenge.
Jacqueline Muga, thank you very much for taking your time to speak to us this morning.
Thank you, and thank you very much for inviting me.
Right, 2146, that's your SMS line at Metropole TVKE across all your social media platforms. My name is Simba Elijah Charles Kiage.